What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In the last episode, we finally got the Auto Union 1000 SP back here in the shop. Actually, I shouldn't say back here. We got it in the shop for the first time in this new shop space. And also, I need to get in the habit of not saying the Auto Union, because now there's two in the stable. Well, there's two again. There's not two 1000 SPs, but we've got a 1000 SP and a 750. So in this episode, we are finally starting to hopefully make more progress on the 1000 SP since the clock for spring is ticking, and I want to drive this car this year. Really want to drive this car. This is not a car that I had a chance to drive stock before pulling it apart and starting this massive project of a tube chassis over a Volkswagen Beetle pan. So I have not driven this car ever before, and I've owned it for 3 years now. So what I think I'm going to be working on next on this car is, since we know the motor runs, I haven't gotten the Type 3 motor running with the factory dual carb setup in it yet, but we did hear it run after I purchased the motor with the progressive single carb that was on it. So we've heard the motor run, but then my buddy Mike Unwin sold me a factory dual carb with intake, throttle linkage, all that stuff set up that I've installed, but have not had the motor running with those carbs yet. But in anticipation of getting this thing running and driving from the driver's seat, we got to address pedals. Now, I've mentioned this in a couple previous episodes working on this car. I have to ultimately put a custom pedal cluster in a custom location, since where the body mounts down over the pan, where the factory pedal cluster would mount on the Beetle pan is almost in the engine bay of the body of the 1000 SP. Like, we wouldn't even be able to reach it. Indeed, where I end up putting a front firewall is going to be closer to you than where the pedals even would be. So the pedals would be in the engine bay. So we need to bring a pedal cluster back on the pan into the cabin of the Auto Union. Now, I've already purchased the pedal cluster. I purchased like a Baja custom pedal cluster that has a brake master and a clutch master and a throttle pedal assembly all built into the unit. And yes, it has a clutch master reservoir on it, which means we're going from the cable clutch system that was originally on the 1959 Beetle pan to a hydraulic clutch system. Now, in anticipation of that project, I want to be able to put it in neutral and in gear from the fly, because throughout this entire build so far, the transmission's just been in neutral. I haven't had any reason to put that thing in gear. Indeed, that split case crash box, I don't even know the state of it. All I know is it's got fluid in it because it's been leaking out of one of the axle seals since I've been in there tampering around. And that's it. It sat in the woods of South Carolina for God knows how long. So more than likely it's okay, but we don't know. So with all of that being said, in today's episode, I'm going to be working on building a custom shift lever to mount to the tunnel of the Beetle chassis where the factory shifter normally mounts. I don't want to mess with the shift rod yet. So essentially, for its first edition, we're going to keep the shift rod in its stock location, but just use a custom shifter. All right, now that I've got it pushed ahead a little bit and clearly aired up, let's take a look at what we've got to do. Okay. All right, so we don't have any pedals, right? And you'll notice where the factory pedal cluster is supposed to mount, way up there. My foot is basically like stretched out right here, and I am a ways from where that pedal cluster mounts. So aside from where the pedals are gonna mount, this is our problem in today's episode, right here. This is where the shifter normally mounts, and this right here is the shift rod. And that rod travels down the tunnel and comes out right here. It's kind of tough light, but it mounts into the back of the transmission right here, or the front of the transmission by way of the car's orientation. So this shift rod that goes up the tunnel is what twists and goes in and out to select each gear. So I have here a late 50s, early 60s Volkswagen Beetle shifter that I got from my buddy Mike. And as you can see, when it's mounted, it's not totally put together right now. When that's mounted where the shifter is supposed to go, it can't be mounted because we are literally hitting the dashboard of the 1000 SP. So if we were to even remotely try to put this where it's supposed to go, we are hitting the dashboard And we're not even like into neutral orientation, let alone first gear, too far away from where you're sitting. You know, like this is where it feels like it should be, just over top the e-brake handle. Now, I've already thought about shortening the shift rod up and putting it right here. We already have an access port here. We could put the shifter right there, right? And that actually wouldn't be a bad spot for it. It really wouldn't. Now, my overall plan or goal for shifting in this car, and it's been something I've wanted to do ever since I decided to put on a Beetle pan, is utilize the 4 on the column shifting that the car had from the factory, right? This was a 4-speed on the column car. Nothing's attached in the engine bay right now, so it just flops around. But this was a 4-speed column shift car from the factory. Now, how cool would it be to somehow figure out a mechanical linkage setup to tie into our shift rod that goes back to the transaxle for the Beetle, right? If we were somehow able to connect to the linkage that goes down this column into what used to be the engine bay and get it to connect, to twist, push down, forward and back, everything that you'd need it to do from right here, right? I am not ready to dive down that rabbit or black hole. Not ready to do it. Because I want to feel like I'm driving an auto union when we get this thing done. I don't want to feel like I'm driving a Beetle panned car. The 700 was also a floor shift 4-speed car. And that too is now on a Beetle pan. But the shifter was here originally and it's there now too. So I don't feel like we've taken away from the experience of driving a 700. So that being said, we're not going to do anything crazy with a tunnel shifting relocation job, essentially. So if I don't ultimately want to shorten that shift rod up for the end-all project of making the column shift work, I'm just going to modify a shifter, right? And I think that's going to be easy enough, as long as we can retain leverage enough to push down to access reverse, right? So if we come out to us with a shifter, I need enough rigidity, essentially, to be able to push down to access reverse, right? So I've got that in mind. So what I'm going to do is we're going to utilize a factory shifter so we can retain all of this at the bottom here, and I'll show you out on the bench, but then extend it right above where the boot would go and bring it out to us, right? So it can be up here somewhere. So this is a similar job as to what I did with the Corvair in that shifter, although making the extended shifter in the Corvair was just cool factor because my cab over wasn't done, still isn't. But I put the factory 1952 Chevy cab over shift knob on that custom shift lever I made in the Corvair. Part of that cab over lives on in the Corvair, and I felt like I was shifting a truck. All right, so here's a look at the Beetle shifter of this era and its components, essentially. It's got a spring that gets pushed up into this perch here. This obviously is on the outside of the tunnel where the boot goes, up and over this. And then this piece sandwiches between them. The spring sits down on this. And this here is what captures the bottom of the ball of the shift rod to like lock into reverse, essentially. I'm thinking of cutting it down here somewhere and sleeving it and plug welding that sleeve to this rod, and then making my own rod out of that sleeve to extend and bend out from underneath the dashboard of the 1000 SP. The materials in which I'm going to do that with are going to be this piece of tube, which will act as the sleeve, and this piece of solid rod, which will act as our new shift rod. Now this rod stock is not the same diameter as the shift bar. Now the rod used for the shift lever is 10 millimeters, since this is German, 1959, or maybe even made in 1958. So this rod is 10 millimeter, and the threads for the shift knob are a 10 mil by 1.5 coarse thread. And this rod here, it might be 3/8, might be 0.375, and the 10 mil is like a 0.41 in SAE decimal. But I've already taken my 10 by 1.5 die, and it wants to grab this. So I'm thinking I might be able to cut enough 10 mil thread into this to just hold the stock shift knob on, which would be great.
He rolled over and rolled around a bunch.
Silas, did you make a snow angel, buddy? It's freezing out. So you guys may have seen in a couple of clips up on the wall, I finally got some wall art up, and it's something I've always wanted to put on the wall. That top one right there is a BMW 700 trunk lid. You can tell by the intake vents on it because it was rear-engined originally from the factory. Well, when I got this car, it came with a second one that had rotted right in half, and it was red, and it had some extra body panels that were usable. I've got 2 doors, I've got 2 front fenders, I even have a hood, like the actual front hood, but I also have this trunk lid, and it's got perfect sunburnt patina to it, and I've just kind of lugged it around and stored it and knew I was gonna hang it on the wall at some point. Well, with the acquisition of the 2 F11s, the juniors, I pulled the trunk lid off of the second parts car and hung it on the wall with the 700 trunk lid. Super stoked on this. I even left the moss. It's crazy that they're both red. It's also crazy that that tiny little DKW brittle badge has stayed together this whole time. So yeah, got a little bit of wall art up on the wall of the shop. Pretty stoked on that. Now we can get it mounted in the car, now that it won't hit the dashboard. And as you can see here, that tube we're gonna use will slide right down over it. So we'll ultimately be able to drill a few holes in this and sleeve this right down over and plug weld it right to it. So let's get this thing put together and get it put back in the car and figure out what kind of shape we're gonna need. Okay. I think that's in. All right, the bolts are started. The question is this in? Ooh, we're moving. Oh boy. This is the first time I've ever run through the gears in this transmission. Okay, so we might just have to get right to cutting what's left of this shifter down a little lower and getting our sleeve over it so we can affix our template that much easier. I've got the e-brake handle pulled all the way out. I think that's the last click right there. If that was going to be in neutral whenever that got pulled, we'd be all right. I think the most difficult factor in this whole thing is going to be whether or not I'll be able to get enough leverage to push down to actuate reverse from out here. So with keeping that in mind, I don't have a working e-brake in any of my old cars. I don't need it. I mean, I guess you need it in some cases, but all the old cars are on air suspension and they lay flat out on the ground. So if I need to set an e-brake, I just air the car down and now it's sitting on the ground. But this is a pretty cool feature to the car, and it's a super rare car, so I'd like to keep a lot of the components of the car there. I think we're gonna have to just start making stuff. We only have about 1.5 inches, 1.75 inches left on it. And I went ahead and cut some of this tube stock I have at 2.5 inches because what I'll do is I'll drill some holes on the top and bottom of this, and we'll slide it down over the stock shift rod like so. And we'll have a couple holes down here that will plug weld. So this will now become the shift rod. But since it's a tube, we can ultimately put our rod down in there, right? So this will ultimately be the beginning of the shifter. I don't know if I want to go farther. I might want to go another 1/2 inch so our bend can begin right about where this is now. I don't know. So I'm going to take the time to reassemble this. We'll put this all back together. We'll mount it back to the tunnel in the car, and I'll slide this down over it. And then from there, we can start bending up our rod and trying to figure out where we can go. Because our first step in welding will be welding this to this once we know how much we can deal with as far as this rod goes. All right, back in the car, and we've got our sleeve. What's left of this shifter, the stock shifter, is still too high, but it gives us an opportunity to kind of feel out like what it would be like to have to reach that far in. You know, and I'm sitting way back here, and this is my arm all the way out. Yeah, let's just cut our length of rod, and we'll just start bending. All right, so I got a piece of pipe in the vise. It is a piece of 4-inch pipe, and I think I'm going to utilize this to help me make my bends. What I've done is I've cleaned the end of this rod up, and I cleaned a spot on this pipe, and I'm gonna weld it right where it's making contact, and then heat it up and bend this end and bend this end, and try to at least initialize a bend, so it might be easier to continue that bend if I need to go more. All right, well, we got our first bend, and it fits into the sleeve. So I guess I'll go to the car, even though this is super long. We'll put the sleeve over what's left of the shift lever, and then we'll put this in the top part of the sleeve and just see if we need to go back to the vise and just bend it even more. Now that we have a bend started, we should be able to make that a little bit more aggressive if we need to. All right. Okay, so we've got our sleeve. Now, let's see. You know, that's not a bad trajectory. We've got a little bit of wiggle room for when we weld it, so we could angle it down a little bit more if we needed to, or up. There's first gear. It barely makes it with how long this rod is. And that's second gear. So if we're up here and make a bend up, you know, neutral's right there. So if we were to make a bend, you know, out here somewhere, we might still be able to push down for reverse. I think we might take a little bit more of that shift knob and a little bit more of that sleeve. So that'll sink down in there just a little bit more. Yeah, if we shorten that down, we won't hit the dashboard in first gear. We'll cut this off another 1/2 inch shorter. That'll still give us enough room to plug weld our sleeve on. Okay, another test fit. We're gonna be back and forth a bunch, I think. It's a nuisance getting this thing in and out all the time, but it's necessary so we can actually figure out the mounting position and throw positions for the gears. The shorter this thing gets, the harder it is to get that ball seated down into the socket of the shift tube. There we go. Okay. Get that glove off me. We don't have much to work with down there now. All right, we've got a new bend. I bent this a little bit more and we cut it off. Neutral, first gear. We're not dangerously close to the dashboard, but I mean, we're not going to be shifting while the e-brake's set. Might be one of those things where we have it in neutral, and then we set the e-brake, and then we put it in gear. There might be a sequence to these things. I got to figure out where we put this next bend in. All right, so just spent the last 3 hours outside shoveling, snow blowing, and plowing. We have probably about 6 to 8 inches accumulated now. It's turning to freezing rain now, so it's like a complete mess. I'm only guesstimating how much of a bend we need. All right, well, the camera died mid-twist, mid-bend. We are laying flat enough to like it at least. Let's just cut it to length. Maybe we cut some threads into it and see if our shift knob will work. And then I'll know whether or not my knuckles are really gonna hit the dashboard in first and third gear. All right, got the gear wrench tap and die set, the big one, worth every penny. Now this shift knob is an M10 by 1.5 course. That's this guy right here. I wonder if we can cut enough into this 3/8 rod to allow that shift knob to thread on here. Let's try it. Now this doesn't want to go on perfectly straight because it's not the right size. That looks pretty good. By eyeball measurements, it looks pretty good. Look at that. Go grab the shift knob and see if we've gone down enough. Oh yeah. I like it. I like it. Well, we've got some threads cut into that rod. Nice. The color of that shift knob even matches the interior of the auto union as well. Okay, so I think I have the original shift lever cut down as far as I want to go. There's not much left to it anyway. We might have our bends where we want them. So without the capability of being able to go side to side, to really know how much leverage I'll have being able to go side to side, but more importantly, pushing down. To access and engage reverse is going to be the toughest part. The welds are what's going to be the most important part here, to be able to push down from here and yank it over and down for reverse. Where we are now, neutral, I kind of like that. If I'm sitting this far back, depending on where I end up building the pedal cluster, that's not too bad. And if we go straight up for first, We're real close to the dashboard, but we have a ton of play here because we're not welded in, right? So I'm gonna probably try to weld it back here and then pulling straight down the second. Love that throw. I can't really get it over up into third and fourth real well because we're not tight, we're not welded. So for now, I'm actually really stoked on this. The shift knob matches the interior. I like the throw. I like it. I say let's start melting some metal together. All right, I got the shifter base out of the car, and next I need to locate where I'm gonna drill my plug weld holes in the sleeve. I've got the shift lever shaft cleaned up, so I'll put a couple holes on both sides, maybe 4 holes total. All right, well, those are certainly large enough holes to get a good plug weld. I think that'll be more than enough. We'll get it set up in the car and we'll tack weld the shift lever in. We'll get it where we want it, and then we'll clean everything up. All right, so we are now experiencing the worst part of this new shop space, and that is this. Steady does it. Nice. All right, guys, where are we going? This here is going to be crucial. I don't think we're gonna send enough sparks to worry about our seats. I'm not gonna fully weld everything. We'll just tack weld stuff here in the car, and then we'll finish weld everything outside on the bench. There's third. There's fourth. All right, I don't want to yank on this thing too much. Let's put one more tack on it. It's funny because the tack I'm making is filling that plug weld. So I hope I'm getting good enough penetration where that'll never yank off. Now I gotta cart the welder back up top. All right, well, we got her welded up and all grinded down. It's not the prettiest job I've done, but it'll do. It'll do. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do up top of the sleeve, so I welded around the top of the sleeve and then just kind of took the flap wheel to it. I'm gonna paint it black ultimately, so it'll probably hide all that. Plus, I want to put the shift boot on it, so the shift boot will grab down here and fit up and over the sleeve. More than likely, that's where it'll sit. Ooh, I like the shift knob orientation now. That's tight, right as it's coming around to being indexed. 2, 3, I guess. And then 4. Keep looking back at the shift rod to see what it's doing in the transmission. But I think that's it. First, second, third, fourth. Down, over to me. That should be reversed right there. But let's take it apart and we'll paint it. You know, I just picked up some of these acetone wipes. It's something I've been meaning to add to the shop for a long time. And now we'll use glass cleaner because I still can't believe that body shop guys use glass cleaner as a final prep before paint, like on cars. Blew my mind. I'm just a hobbyist. These are things I don't know. All right, we're outside. It's absolutely freezing and it's super windy. So we're gonna try to get this done as fast as possible. Krylon Fusion all-in-one, satin black. I really like this because you can just get it at Lowe's and it dries super fast. It's not a Rust-Oleum. I feel like Rust-Oleum takes 3 days to dry. I hate painting inside the shop because I just feel like I get overspray on absolutely everything. All right, well, we're in. Paint is dry. Let it hang dry here in the shop. Went and grabbed a coffee. Let's reinstall. For the last time, at least in this episode, we'll have this thing out numerous times throughout the build, I'm sure, because unfortunately, that body has to come off that pan plenty more times before we're done with this thing. All right, guys, well, without boring you with yet another shifter installation, we are in, it's painted. Super happy with the way it looks, the way it feels, at least so far. We haven't driven it yet, so who knows how it's gonna feel when we drive it. But painted black, looks great. The shift knob matches perfectly with the interior color of this car, so really happy with that. First, second, third, fourth. And as long as I can get the knack of it, down, over, reverse. One more thing we need to figure out, I'll put it in neutral, we'll push the car, and then I'll run through the gears and see if it holds. All right, so it should be in neutral, so it should push fine. Yeah. That should be first gear. Okay, we're in gear there. That should be second gear. We are indeed in a gear. Yeah, that's definitely in gear. And it feels like it's a longer gear too because I can push it farther. I think that's fourth. Yeah, that's fourth. Reverse is up next. All right, neutral. Yep. That's reverse. Please tell me that's reverse. All right, come on. Oh, yes, yes. Fantastic. Well, a look from inside the cabin. I really do like the shift knob a lot and how it matches the rest of the car. Just have to get a boot. Just have to get a boot on it. But I am thrilled we can reach reverse with this thing. When we started this, it was a huge unknown. So to run through the gears in the driver's seat, first, second, third, straight back for fourth. And again, not a terrible positioning. I'm not encroaching on the passenger side of the car too hard. Still kind of in line with the tunnel. Reverse. Oh, there it is, right there. And for being in reverse, you know, if my legs are right here, that's really not too bad. Well, guys, it feels great to finally get something else done on the 1000 SP. It's been months since I've done anything on this car. The move home to New Hampshire was just a huge setback in this project, but a huge step forward with life, you know? So that's just the way these things go. But I am really hoping to be full steam ahead on this car. I really want to drive this thing this spring. For those of you in the Northeast or the East Coast that are planning on making it to Dust Off this April, I think it's April 26th and 27th. My good friends Blake and Tom put that show on. It's a Volkswagen, Audi, and I believe Porsche, and maybe other European makes and models. But I'm planning on having the 700 and the 1000 SP at Dust Off this year, and I would love to drive it in under its own power. So that means I have a lot of work to do. I want to stay consistent on this car. Filming it makes it take a lot more time for sure, but it feels good to get at least something else done on this car. Next up, I think we're gonna move right on to pedal cluster. We're gonna move on to where the pedals are gonna go, how I'm gonna mount them, and everything that's involved in that whole project. So that's gonna do it for this episode. So stoked to have this thing in the shop and to have it sitting on the floor. I love this car and its body lines. Well, as always, thank you so much for watching, guys, and for all of your support. We will see you in the next episode.